I'm Peter Henderson, and this is a Case Against Celtic Boys Club podcast.
The founder of Celtic Boys Club has been found guilty of sexual offences against 3 boys in the 1980s and 1990s.
What the case comes down to is whether or not Celtic Football Club are responsible in law for the terrible acts of the paedophiles at the heart of Celtic Boys Club.
One by one, he raped them. He raped them systematically.
A child has got no chance of getting away from the child abuser. The fear and the terror is off the scale.
We were all young boys, 14, 15, so nobody was going to really say anything because would they have been believed?
Just a warning, this podcast will not be gratuitous, but it will discuss the sexual abuse of children and its consequences. The biggest thing you can do to support the podcast is to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. The more members of the public that know about this podcast means the more people getting the survivor's message out there. The podcast is free, but it does take a lot of time and effort to make. If you're able to make a small donation to its production, it goes a long way to help. Please follow the link to our Patreon donation site. It's your help that makes this podcast possible. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Celtic Boys Club podcast. Thanks for listening. This episode is going to be a little bit different. Today I'm in Edinburgh at the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, which was set up by the Scottish Government to uncover the truth about abuse in schools and local authority institutions. I'm here to speak to 2 survivors, but these men were not abused at Celtic Boys Club. Abuse in football and sport isn't being investigated by the inquiry, and we'll talk about that. These men were abused at Edinburgh Academy, one of Scotland's top private schools. I wanted to speak to them about how, despite belonging to a very different world to the youngsters at Celtic Boys Club, abuse has affected their adult lives in very similar ways, and how they now have the chance at a kind of justice not open to those who suffered in a football setting.
My name is Neil Russell, and I'm a survivor of abuse at the Edinburgh Academy, where I was a boarder from 1964 to 1974.
My name is Giles Moffat. I'm also a survivor of abuse at the Edinburgh Academy. I was there from 1980 to 1990, and with Nicky Campbell and Neil Russell and a large group of people, we set up a movement, a campaigning group called EA Survivors.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me and the podcast, the Case Against Celtic Boys Club podcast. Now people might think, why am I talking to yourselves about this? And the reason why is, in the past I've had some involvement helping to publicise the abuse that went on at Edinburgh private schools, Edinburgh Academy, Fettes College, as well as working on the case involving survivors at Celtic Boys Club. And it struck me that there are a great deal of similarities between what happened to 2 groups of people that maybe came from different parts of Scottish society, but there are a lot of similarities. Can you talk about what happened to yourselves and why you wanted to become involved in raising awareness and pursuing this issue?
My abuse was physical abuse, mainly during the period of my life when I'm between 9 and 13. And the consequences of that have been with me all of my life. I'm now 66. I've been in psychiatric and psychotherapeutic care for over 30 years. I've been through 2 divorces, and one of the things that caused me to get involved with the survivors after Nicky Campbell's broadcast last year was the desire to find some peace for myself for the rest of my life. I've lived too long in the shadow of what happened to me at the Edinburgh Academy, and to be perfectly honest, Nicky gave me the courage to step forward, and in stepping forward I have been astounded to find a group of former pupils. There's over 40 of us who share that experience. and we understand exactly what the other person went through. And that shared experience is binding us together in a way that I just would never have expected.
How do you feel, Giles?
I've struggled with what happened when I was 8, 9, 10 for many years. Thought about what action I could take, and really until recently felt there was no option, there was no recourse for what happened. And I think there's a tipping point where certain things have to happen in society, in the media, when the prospect of success and justice suddenly becomes possible. It's taken Savile in the world of broadcasting, Rolf Harris, Weinstein in the film industry, Epstein and his highly publicised abuses. It's taken all of that, and probably changes in society over time, for it to be possible for this to happen. And quite frankly, until Nicky Campbell and Alex Renton did the podcast, I didn't think there was any possibility of success in terms of bringing people into the courts, having prosecutions, success in terms of actually even getting the truth about what happened during those decades properly recorded. And to an extent, the existence of the inquiry is an opportunity for that as well. We have strength in numbers. We don't take any shit from the inquiry, the police or the Crown Office or the Academy or Fetties or Loretta or any of these people. All we care about is setting the record straight and then going, you know what, that finally worked out in the end.
You've talked a lot about encountering other survivors and not knowing them previously. It's something I've observed about, some of the Celtic survivors. I know that they don't have that campaign group. They don't have a community like that. Is that something that, if that were to be possible, that shared solidarity as one group of survivors talking to another group of survivors, what message would you send to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Information is power. We've been able to kind of tie together various strands of what took place and realise that we weren't on our own. It wasn't isolated. And one of the things that abuse victims often feel is that it just happened to them. The reality is this has been going on, and it's massive. It's massive, and it's the same. We had the same emotions as children. We've suffered the same issues broadly as adults. Addiction problems. Not all of us, but many of us. Suicide attempts. Most of us. Some of us successfully, unfortunately. We've even had guys who've been homeless, who spent 13 years being educated at the Edinburgh Academy. The impact of abuse, no matter where you come from, on a child at that age will undoubtedly be the same, no matter where, whether you're West Coast, East Coast, son of a judge, or just great at football.
If it can work within our group, then I just have this sense of faith that it could work between groups, because whatever the circumstances, whatever the background, whether it's from the top of the privilege of society right down to the roots of society, the experience of the little child, the terror, the loneliness, the aloneness of then dealing with it as an adult is the same. I sat in a dormitory of 6 people watching my abuser, Hamish Dawson, interfere with other boys. So therefore, in my 12, 13-year-old brain, I knew that I wasn't alone. And yet if you'd asked me, did I feel alone with it? The answer is yes, for 50 years.
You're alone with it because you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You don't know how to get out of it. So it's that powerless, powerlessness that isolates you basically at the time, and that isolation is what stopped people from talking for years.
We're going to take a break for just a moment, but I would like to thank everyone who has followed and subscribed to the podcast. I'd also like to thank the Patreon donors in particular. This podcast is very challenging to make in terms of time and resources, and it's the support of its listeners that allows the message of the Boys Club survivors to reach a wider audience. Welcome back. Remember to subscribe, write a review, a positive one I hope, and follow the podcast on Twitter. Can we talk a little about what it's like to take on an institution and the establishment, Edinburgh Academy? Obviously, right at the top of the Scottish educational establishment. Celtic Football Club, right at the top of the Scottish sports establishment. Very, very powerful institutions. The allegation about the abuse that went on at Celtic Boys Club is it could have been stopped on many occasions, and it wasn't stopped. Similar things must have happened at Edinburgh Academy. I mean, how does a large organisation like that rationalise not acting to stop the abuse of children?
There's only one rationale, and that is protection of its reputation and image. And I don't pretend to understand how you put that before the welfare of the children in your care, but that is exactly what teachers, senior management, headmasters, governors, chairs of governors did for over 50 years. The first complaint that, as far as I'm aware, to the school about abuse being perpetrated by teachers was in the early 1970s. The school were able to either just block and deny, or to say, yes, we'll deal with it, and do nothing, and hope that it would go away.
Your question about the institutions being powerful and the prospect of success in dealing with them, I can very easily answer that. And this will sound slightly cliched, but there's no other way of saying it. And we, as a group, have the most powerful weapon in all of this, and that's we know the truth of what happened, because it happened to us. No one knows more about the Edinburgh Academy and its abuse of its students than us plus the others who have come forward.
One of the things I'd like to talk to you about is we're obviously in the offices of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. Now, for reasons which we'll go on to explore in future episodes of the podcast, abuse in sport, abuse in football was specifically not included in the official inquiry. Can you talk about how you found the inquiry and any observations that you can make about whether you think it would have been helpful had abuse in football, in particular the boys' club situation, if that had been included so people could have been called and had given evidence under oath?
You would expect something of that profile to warrant investigation. Yes, absolutely.
There was an inquiry run by the Scottish Football Association along similar lines to the inquiry that was run by the English Football Association. People were interviewed, recommendations were made. It would appear to me and survivors and the family of survivors that the majority of those recommendations have just been ignored. There are many survivors that feel that had they been able to be part of an inquiry such as this or similar to this that had some legal teeth to it, a bit of bite to it, that would have been far more satisfactory than the report that was done by the Scottish Football Association. And Neil, how do you feel about this inquiry, whether abuse in sport should have been included? How have you found the process? Has it been flawed, helpful, both?
The most important thing is, and you referred to it, the legal basis. it has required the institutions to provide evidence. And as an individual or as a group of individuals, we would never have been able to get hold of that without going through hugely expensive court processes. And the evidence combined with our fighting for equal legal status. So we are the first group of boarding school survivors to have been granted something called leave to appear. And leave to appear means that we are funded by the Scottish Government through the inquiry to have solicitors at the inquiry to ask questions. And that has given us equality of status for the first time in our lives with the institution that abused us. In itself, that is hugely powerful. I mean, that is a massive step for us as survivors.
What you've just articulated there is what survivors across Scottish football, this is what they want. They want to feel that there's some kind of officialdom there, some kind of accountability, a process by which people can be compelled to appear and give evidence. People that may have been involved in the Celtic families of clubs in the past are able to just thumb their nose at the process. And this is something the survivors and some campaigners who support the survivors are very upset about.
Well, I think the legal status of the inquiry is a massive step for our case, because all survivors give evidence voluntarily, but the school gets summoned under Section 21, and they are in contempt of court if they don't turn up, and so that has then equalled the scales.
If you could send a message of solidarity to the people who have been abused at Celtic Boys Club, what would you say to them?
The impact of abuse is the same on us as it has been on you. We might come from different parts of the country, different schools, but the low self-worth, the anger, powerlessness, substance abuse, we've been there, and it wasn't our fault that we were born in the environment we were born into, and it wasn't your fault that you were abused by people in these clubs. We're all just kids, and all I would say is there is actually hope. I go back to that point. The truth is the most powerful weapon.
You may feel alone at the moment, but 20 odd of you are involved in this civil litigation. So you've started the process of coming together. And if you continue that process and join up with other survivors, you will find that we all share the same experience. And that sense of not being alone for the first time is probably the most powerful and wonderful feeling that I've ever experienced.
We've approached Celtic Football Club for a comment. We've received no reply. Thank you again for your support, and remember to subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. Write a review if you can, and remember to follow us on Twitter.